Both Ismaila Diagne and Jun Seok Yeo got some run against Baylor. What are the short and long-term prospects for both international players heading into the rest of the season?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, place your first $5 bet, and you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Well, we are finalizing our player preview series. For those of you who've been listening throughout the offseason, at least throughout the last 3 or 4 weeks, we have been previewing every player on Gonzaga's roster, talking about their history, how they ended up here in Spokane. We also talk about their best and worst case scenarios for this season, their expected role and their future in Spokane, and if relevant, their future playing basketball outside of Gonzaga. We did not quite get all of these done prior to the start of the season, so we're kind of smashing these last couple together here into one episode. We're going to talk not only about Ismaila Diagne and Jun Seok Yeo, we're also going to talk about the Gonzaga walk-ons. The expectation was I will be fine to be able to do this episode after the Baylor game, because it's not like those guys are going to play in what is expected to be a 5 to 10 point game against Baylor. Was not expecting that to be a 35 plus point blowout win for Gonzaga over the Baylor Bears. And of course, that means we did not only see Jun Seok Yeo and Ismaila Diagne, we saw Joaquim quite famously in that game as well. So we'll talk a little bit about the very small glimpses we saw of those guys in that game, as well as their history and everything else. So we'll start here in the first segment with Jun Seok Yeo, the longest tenured player, I guess, outside of Joe among the ones we're talking about here. Yeo is a 6'9" forward from Seoul, South Korea. He did play a little bit of college basketball in Korea. He also played with the FIBA U18 team and was a surprise addition to Gonzaga's roster in the second semester of the 2022-23 season. So he joined around January. He did not suit up for Gonzaga during the 22-23 season, but drew a lot of hope. There are a lot of kind of hype coming into the next season. We'd seen some highlights of him. He played well in those FIBA U18 tournaments. Obviously, Gonzaga's track record with international players is extremely high, and we didn't really know exactly what we had in Jun Seok Yeo, but there was some optimism for him coming into his first official season playing basketball for Gonzaga in 23-24. And we saw a player who was very raw, who showed some tantalizing upside at times, but didn't really ever get opportunities to play rotation minutes for Gonzaga and didn't look fully prepared in terms of the speed of the game, the offensive and defensive sets. All told, he played in 25 games, made one start, averaged just under 7 minutes per game, 2.3 points, 1.2 rebounds. Was 70.8% on two-pointers. That was on 17 of 24 attempts. Again, many of those coming in transition. He was 13.6% from three of 22. So not a bad looking shot. I can see why he took them, but just wasn't able to find the bottom of the net as consistently. Again, 22 attempts, like 13.6% looks awful. If he made 3 more, it still wouldn't be great, but it would look a lot better. That kind of sample size is just not worth looking too much into. Same goes for the 71% on two-pointers. He had a couple nice performances, 10 points, 4 rebounds on 4 of 6 shooting against Arkansas Pine Bluff, one of the worst D1 teams in college basketball last year, 9.7 rebounds and 4 assists against Eastern Oregon, an NAIA school, in 22 minutes of action. This season, he is hit 1 jump shot. He's 1 of 2 from the field, missed a 3-pointer, but hit a little mid-range jumper against Baylor in the final few minutes of that game. Next up, you have Ismaila Diagne, a 7-foot center from Senegal. He has been playing professional basketball through the Real Madrid system since he was a teenager. They have a kind of a developmental leagues, the way that they do in soccer and the way that the United States has kind of emulated in professional soccer. They do that for basketball as well over in Europe. And so Diagne's a guy who has been in this Real Madrid system, I think, since he was 13, 14 years old in Spain. He's played 5 total games with the top club, the Real Madrid #1 team. Was one of the youngest players to ever play in the EuroLeague. I think Luka Doncic is one of the only other players who's younger than him who's played in that league, which tells you a lot about the upside that this young man has. He has played 5 total games with the top club, averaging 4.2 points and 3.9 rebounds in those 5 games. Also has some experience with the U18 Real Madrid club as well. Joined the Zags as the only scholarship freshman for this 24-25 season. Gonzaga had some other targets that they struck out on. They ultimately added Diagne fairly late in the offseason, a guy that, I don't know how much they had been able to scout him prior to that, but certainly has some upside and wanted to fill out their roster, add a future piece to the front court here. Has some buzz as an NBA draft prospect. We'll talk more about that later in the show. Very, very raw. We saw him show some signs in the Craziness in the Kennel. We saw him play a little bit in the exhibition games as well, but very raw. You can tell that there's still some stuff he needs to work on. But we did get to see him score some points against Baylor. He had 4 points in that game against the Bears. 1 of 1 from the field, 2 of 2 from the free throw line in 3 minutes of action. Was very cool to see him get that opportunity for Gonzaga. And then we got the walk-ons, quite a few of them, but won't spend as long on each of them. Of course, there's Joe Few, 6-foot redshirt junior from Spokane. Mark Few's son has played 29 career games for Gonzaga, 82 minutes, 6 total points scored, 14 rebounds, 13 assists, and 4 steals. He redshirted in the 22-23 season, but he played the year prior to that and then has played the last season as well. He has 1 career-made field goal. He's 4 of 12 from the free throw line, 1 of 17 from the field, and of course is now known nationally by a lot more people who had never knew his name prior to this because he got dunked on incredibly ferociously by Baylor star freshman VJ Edgecombe in that game against the Bears. I said it on the show. I'll say it again. Hats off to Joe for contesting. Mark Few gave him credit in his post-game interview of like, hey, that's what we teach the guys to do. Nothing wrong with going after it, but yeah, you're going to be on a poster for a very long time because of that. The other walk-ons on this team, none of them have played yet for Gonzaga. Only one of them was on the team last year. That was Joaquim ArauezMoore. They call him Q. 6'1" redshirt freshman guard from Ross, California. He was on the roster last year, but he did not play. He redshirted. It's pretty common for freshman redshirt or freshman walk-ons to redshirt and then start playing later in their career. Colby Brooks was like that. Abe Eagle was like that. I'm sure there's many others who are like that as well. So for ArauezMoore to have not played last year, I'm guessing that he will be one of the walk-ons who plays in garbage time this year. He played 4 minutes at Craziness, had 2 rebounds. He played 2 minutes against Warner Pacific and had an assist in that game. Your other 3 walk-ons, Noah Holland is a 6'9" junior forward from Rathdrum, Idaho. He previously played at Allen Hancock Junior College. Both his parents played at Gonzaga. His dad was on the basketball team. His mom was on the volleyball team. Holland played about 5 minutes at Craziness, but did not record any stats. He had 2 points and a rebound in 1 minute against Warner Pacific. I think there's a chance he plays this year. If I was guessing the top 2 most likely to play, garbage time minutes, obviously we know Joe Few is going to. I would think Q is second and then Holland would be third, but I'm guessing that all 3 of them will play just because Holland is a junior. I think they'll give him opportunities to play some of those garbage time minutes. And then you have the 2 true walk-on freshmen, Graydon Lemke and Cade Orness. Lemke's a 6'10" freshman from Las Vegas. He had some legitimate buzz as an actual prospect early in his high school career, got injured, which kind of put him off of that radar. But anytime you can add a 6'9" player who had some legitimate buzz as a walk-on, you got to feel pretty good about that. Lemke played just under 2 minutes at Craziness, missed both his 3-point attempts, and did not play against Warner Pacific. Again, they think that's a sign he's probably not going to play this season. Cade Orness is a 6'3" freshman guard from Poulsbo, Washington, played at North Kitsap High School. One of the all-time leading scorers in the state of Washington. This dude was an absolute bucket while at North Kitsap High School. Competed against Davis Fogel, a 2025 committed prospect for Gonzaga in that class. Played 2 minutes at Craziness, did not record any stats, and did not play against Warner Pacific. So again, I think the likelihood is that both Lemke and Orness will not play any minutes this season, but could be in the mix for some of those garbage time minutes going forward after this. So let's talk about what the best and worst case scenarios are for Yeo, for Diagne, and for the walk-ons, all coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up now at robinhood.com/gold. Terms do apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, get ready to tackle the college hoops season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on that same page where you place those bets. And folks, we got odds coming out for the battle for Atlantis. Gonzaga unsurprisingly leads in terms of having the best odds to win the national or to win the championship of the battle for Atlantis. They're at plus 145 right now. Arizona behind them at plus 170. Indiana is next at plus 600. Folks, I feel pretty darn good about Gonzaga winning the battle for Atlantis. If you were with me, visit FanDuel.com, join today. You bet $5, you win, you get $150 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, and we're still finishing up our season preview series, talking about every player on Gonzaga's roster. Here we talk about the best and worst case scenarios for each player. As a final reminder, since we are done with these after this is best case within reason, worst case without injury. It's not reasonable to say Joe Few is going to win Player of the Year or WCC Player of the Year or play meaningful minutes this year. So we're not going to talk about that as being the best case scenario. Obviously, the worst case scenario for any players, they get hurt and miss the season. We're not going to discuss that unless it is relevant to said player's history. We'll start with Jun Seok Yeo. The best case scenario for Yeo is that he plays enough in garbage time, plays well enough in garbage time to gradually earn more minutes as the year goes on. Basically, that the growth that we saw in snippets last year continues, that he looks more comfortable with his role on both offense and defense for Gonzaga. Now, this Gonzaga team is much deeper than last year's Gonzaga team. So for Yeo, even if he is improved, which I suspect he probably is, the odds of getting more playing time it's just going to be more difficult. You have Ben Gregg, you have Michael Ajayi, you have Dusty Stromer, you have obviously the two bigs in EK and Huff, you have Caleb Battle who can play some three-guard lineups. This team is really, really deep in front of Jun Seok Yeo. So the best case scenario for him is that when he does get those opportunities, probably against bad teams, probably in garbage time in the second half, he looks well. He looks good. He continues to get out in transition. He continues to score in those places. He continues to be a gifted passer. The three-point shot looks improved. Again, the form looked pretty good last year. He just didn't have a very big sample size. You don't need to go out and shoot 40%, but when he's shooting threes, he's taking good looks. He's knocking down some open ones. He's got a better percentage this year, and he just looks more comfortable. And that if he's returning for his senior year, which there's no reason to expect he won't, that him taking on a bigger role is not something that is concerning to the fan base, that we feel like he's ready to step into a bigger role. The worst case for Jun Seok Yeo is that he's buried on the bench, that he just doesn't play outside of a few minutes in huge blowout games. He played about 2 minutes against Baylor in a 38-point win. If Gonzaga does that to a bunch of teams, he might get a bunch of 2-minute games, but we don't ever see him get 4, 5, 6-minute stretches. We don't see him get opportunities in the first half of any games, and he's just only getting to play in situations where you don't really get to see his skill sets on display for longer than 90 seconds or so. That doesn't mean that the growth is not happening behind the scenes, but we're not getting to see it. Or we see him on the floor and he still looks a little lost. He still doesn't seem to know where to go. He's got teammates grabbing his jersey and moving him over to defend somewhere else. He's just not quite looking like he's grasping the offensive and defensive sets that Gonzaga is running. And that at the end of the year, either he does not choose to stick around or he's not viewed as somebody who's going to step into a bigger role for the 25-26 season. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that we see clear growth as the season goes on. A lot of this is going to be behind the scenes, that he's getting better going up against Graham Ike and Braden Huff in practice, that he's making those guys better because he's so big and he's so strong that he is making Braden Huff have to finish through contact, that he is helping Graham Ike's footwork and development, that he is overall being a good teammate while getting better himself behind the scenes. The best case scenario for Ismaila Diagne is that he plays well in garbage time and that he uses his size well. He draws contact, he gets to the free throw line, things we saw him do already in the game against Baylor, and that he's expected to take on a bigger role in the 25-26 season, and that is an exciting prospect. Fans are ready to see him be Gonzaga's backup center. They're ready to see him be a potential sophomore breakout candidate across college basketball because of the growth we saw during his snippets of playing time throughout this season. The worst case scenario for Ismaila Diagne, again, it's probably going to be stuff behind the scenes. Maybe we never see that rawness go away in the snippets of playing time that he gets, but again, that may not be a signal that he's not getting better. It's just going to be hard to tell based on what we expect to be 2 to 3 minutes of playing time periodically throughout the season. But at the end of the year, we still feel like he's a year plus away. We don't feel like he's ready to be a rotation piece for Gonzaga in the 25-26 season. Obviously, some of the other stuff behind the scenes could be problematic. Like, again, if the staff doesn't feel like he's getting better, he's not utilizing practice time well, things like that. Again, I don't want to besmirch anybody's character. I've heard nothing but good things about Ismaila Diagne, but obviously a worst case scenario for any young player is that they're not using the time where they're expected to be getting better to actually do so. We're going to lump all the walk-ons together here. The best case scenario for the walk-ons is that they hit the 10th three-pointer of the game and win tacos for the crowd. That's the best case scenario for a walk-on. You come into the game, the crowd's chanting they want tacos, you hit a three, the place goes nuts because you're the person that won everybody in the stadium a free taco. I'm not saying this even derisively or jokingly. That is the best case scenario on the court for walk-on players, is to be able to do something like that. Sure, you could also, get a breakaway dunk, or I think it was last year when Joe Few in the game against Eastern Oregon, blocked a shot at the rim. You make a cool highlight play, something like that. You're a crowd favorite. They're chanting for you. We want Joe. We want Q. We want Cade, whatever it may be. You're getting that kind of love from the fans. You're working hard in practice. You're making your teammates better. You're making the starters better. The best case scenario for some of these walk-ons is that you get enough experience playing Division I basketball that you end up getting to transfer and play somewhere else. Coley Brooks transferred to San Diego. He's transferred to another Division I school. San Diego hasn't played as I'm recording this, so we haven't seen how much of a role he's going to have, if there is much of a role for him. But he transferred to get a scholarship to play Division I basketball. Matthew Lang transferred to Arizona. Granted, he was following Tommy Lloyd, and then he started playing professionally. Will Graves transferred and played real minutes at a Division III school. The best case scenario for some of these walk-ons might be somewhere other than Gonzaga, where they get an opportunity to play real minutes. The worst case scenario for walk-ons, we saw it. We saw it happen already. Joe Few got dunked on incredibly ferociously. He was SportsCenter's #1 play. They were tweeting still images of his face with VJ Edgecombe's lower half right in front of him. That's the worst case scenario. And Joe, quite literally took it on the chin, but was smiling, was laughing about it. He's got the right attitude about it, but that's kind of the worst case scenario in terms of what can happen to a walk-on. The other stuff would be, again, mostly things you wouldn't see, not helping the team, not being a model Gonzaga basketball player, either because you have a bad attitude, because your grades are not good, you're not hustling in practice, you're not doing everything you can to make your teammates better, because that's your job as a walk-on player. It really is. You're supposed to be cheering hard on the sidelines, gassing your guys up, being encouraging, but also working really hard in practice, learning the other team's schemes, running them in those practices to help make them better. Again, we're not necessarily going to see that. If a player quietly disappears from the team, that's probably a sign that something like that happened, and that would be where those worst-case scenarios would come into play. But we know none of these guys are going to be legitimate rotation pieces this season, but that doesn't mean the future isn't potentially bright for some of them, and we're going to talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, fellas, sometimes intimate moments can happen spontaneously, and you always want to be ready. Hims provides access to treatments that help give you the boost of confidence you need so that you're ready whenever the mood strikes. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. And if prescribed, the medication ships directly to you in discreet packaging for free. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can help you find the ED option that works for you. So start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. Again, hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. All right, segment 3, Andy Patton, Locked On Zags, closing out the show, continuing our season preview episode here, talking Jun Seok Yeo, Ismaila Diagne, and Gonzaga's litany of walk-on players on the roster. We're going to talk expected role, expected production this season, and then we're going to talk about each player's future, whether in Spokane or elsewhere. We'll start with Jun Seok Yeo. It's probably not going to look much different than last year. He played 25 games last year, averaged about 7 minutes per game. I think it'll be a little bit less, not because he hasn't improved. I think that he has, but because Gonzaga has more depth, they're not going to need him as much. Probably won't play as many first half minutes as he did last year. Probably won't start any games, which he did once last year. So I'd expect 25-ish games, 4 to 5 minutes per game. Hopefully we see some more made threes. We see him look a little bit more comfortable in the system. I do think those are things that we will see. A player who looks less lost, more comfortable defensively, more comfortable with where he's supposed to be offensively, scoring out in transition, something we know he's good at because he's a very, very good athlete. And just a player who looks a little bit more comfortable, but isn't necessarily moving forward in the rotation, at least not this season. For Ismaila Diagne, I think it's going to be fairly similar to Yeo, 25-ish games. He'll play in a lot of games. He'll play in a lot of garbage time. He won't play against some of the better teams that Gonzaga plays in close games. Again, I wouldn't have expected him to play against Baylor, and he did because that ended up being a 38-point victory. I think for Diagne, we'll see some opportunities for him to just feast. There'll be a game or two where he has like 6 points in 3 minutes or 8 points in 5 minutes because he goes 4 of 4 from the field, or he goes 3 of 3 with a couple free throws because he only plays 3 minutes, but every time down they give him the ball and they're playing, I'll pick on Pacific or San Diego or Portland, and they're playing their walk-ons, their backups, and Diagne's 7 feet, 250 pounds. Like, he's just going to absolutely go to work on those guys. So I think we'll see a few games like that. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean anything, but keep in mind, if he is going up against a 6'6" walk-on for Portland, it's probably not necessarily going to translate to him having, a monstrous sophomore season or anything like that. But I do think we're going to see him get better as the year goes on. We're going to see him look more comfortable. He looked really raw in the exhibition games, and I think he still is. He's still very young. He's still adjusting to college basketball. So I think we're going to see some growing pains from him at times. But again, a lot of his growth and development is going to happen behind the scenes. For the walk-ons, again, I think only 2, maybe 3 of them will play this year. Few, obviously. We already know he's going to play this year because he already has. I think Q is going to play since he redshirted last year. I think Noah Holland is going to play because he is a junior after having already spent a couple of years at the junior college level. I think Graydon Lemke and Kador Ness are likely to redshirt. I don't know that for sure. It's just a guess based on how Gonzaga has traditionally treated their true freshman walk-on players. Whereas I think Holland could potentially redshirt as well. Whereas I think few won't, and Q, I suspect, won't. It's possible he does too, but that would be, it wouldn't be a redshirt. He just wouldn't play this year. He's already redshirted once. So it'd be interesting to see if that ends up happening for him or not. As for the future for these guys, Yo's got 1 year of eligibility left after this season. If he shows growth, if we see opportunities, we see him looking better, more comfortable, hitting more shots, I could see him being a rotation guy in the 25-26 season, which would be his senior year. Again, Ben Gregg is leaving, Michael Ajayi is leaving, Caliph Battle is leaving. That opens up a lot of spots. We think there's a real possibility Graham Ike leaves. It's possible Steel Ventures is back, but if he's not, there's a lot of playing time that's available. Gonzaga will add transfers. They will add players to fill some of those roles, but Yeo could be in line for a bigger role his senior year if he chooses to stick around. He may opt to go back to Korea and start a professional career. He may opt to enter the transfer portal. He may opt to stick around and be somebody who's maybe the 9th guy, 8th guy, maybe even a little bit better if in the best case scenario for him, he does have a bigger rotation role next season. But I think the more likely outcome is if he does return, he's, like kind of that 8th guy playing consistently night in and night out, but still not delivering a huge amount of minutes. Diagne has 3 years of eligibility after this. He could be an NBA guy, and we'll talk about that in a second, but he's a guy who the upside is sky high for him, and Gonzaga bigs develop really well. This is the right place to be if you're a young, raw big man who wants to develop your skills. If Graham Ike leaves after this year, Braden Huff is your starting center. It is possible Diagne is ready to be the Gonzaga's backup center as a sophomore. Braden Huff redshirted his entire freshman year and then was Gonzaga's backup center last year. Diagne is probably he's not going to redshirt this year unless he doesn't play for the rest of the season and they apply for a red shirt, which he would probably get, but likely Diagne does not redshirt this year and is ready to take on that backup center role next year. Again, kind of depends on the growth this year. Best case for him, he is Gonzaga's backup center. Worst case, they bring in somebody else and he's still the 3rd string center because he hasn't developed enough to be ready for that role. The walk-ons, Few's got 1 year remaining after this because of his red shirt. Q's got 3 years after this because of his red shirt. Halan's got 1 year after this, and Lemke and Orness, of course, left 3 years after this because maybe 4 years after this if they redshirt this season. And then we always end the show, these previews with NBA future. We're not going to talk about the NBA future for the walk-ons. It's just not really realistic. Frankly, we're not going to talk about it with Yeo either. He doesn't look like an NBA player right now. He's built like an NBA wing. He's got some athleticism, but he doesn't look like an NBA player. His outside shot is not there. The defensive rotations, it would take a monstrous, tremendous, otherworldly amount of development for him over this season and next season for him to be in the NBA conversation. I don't want to say it's impossible because it's not, but it seems very unlikely, and he's nowhere close to the NBA radar at this point. But Ismaila Diagne, again, he's not there yet either, but there's already been talk about him. People had him as a deep prospect in the 2025 draft, this upcoming draft, before he committed to Gonzaga. Once he committed to Gonzaga and it was clear he's not going to have a role this year, he's no longer in those NBA draft conversations for this year. But the fact of the matter is he's a 7-foot, very, very big, strong, young kid who could potentially develop. He already looks like he could be a rim protector. If the outside shot shows up at all, that's an NBA player. I've said this on the show, and I'll say it again here. If you've seen Gonzaga's team photo, go check it out on the website if you haven't checked it out yet. Diagne looks a half a foot taller. He's not, but he looks like at least a half a head taller than Graham Ike, then Braden Huff, then Noah Halan, then all those other bigger guys, Graydon Lemke. He's listed at 7 feet, and I think he's legitimately it. Huff and Ike are both like 6'10"-ish. And so I think that, I think that probably puts Diagne right around 7 feet, but he looks quite a bit bigger than them. He's a big dude, and he's a strong dude, and he's really young. And by all accounts, he works really hard, and he's got some skill, some touch. He's played professionally in Europe, which always helps. Like, I think there's an NBA future for Ismaila Diagne. If you listened to my bold predictions episode, I said I think there's 4 NBA players on Gonzaga's roster. He's part of the reason I think there's more NBA players on this team than a lot of people do, because he's not going to play big minutes this year. So he's not getting that kind of attention as an NBA player right now. But it wouldn't surprise me if eventually he is somebody who plays in the association just because of the raw skills and size that he already possesses. That's going to wrap it up for today and for our season preview series. Got them all done. Just a little late, a few days after the start of the season, but hey, it happens. I'll be back on Friday with a preview of this Arizona State game. We'll talk a little bit about the women's team. They got their first W of the season against Montana on Tuesday night. Shout out to the Lady Zags for that. Yvonne Ejim, monster game. Allie Turner, freshman, led the team in scoring. That is an exciting development for Lisa Fortier's team. We'll talk more about that later this week as well. Get you ready for Arizona State. Then next week, we got you getting ready for Long Beach State, San Diego State, all sorts of fun stuff coming your way, folks. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. And until next time, as always, go Zags.